Welcome to Module 2 of Setting Up Your Employees for Human Resources and Payroll. Now that we have covered the setup of HR and Payroll, we will drill into setting up an employee in Human Resources and Payroll to have a successful payroll process. Items that we will cover in Module 2 will be the Payroll Employee, your HR Employee setup, Position Control, Payroll Extensions and what is included in it, and the Applicant Tracking piece. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started on the payroll entry of your employee. So I will cover all the items we need to set up your employee on the payroll side to be able to run a successful payroll. So what I'll do is I'll expand right here under the cards. I'm going to expand this out so we can go through all the different areas of setting up on the employee. So if I start by clicking on Employee, and I'll be using the acronym Employee throughout the demonstration today. As I stated prior, all the information that's in red is a required field for you to save out of the employee maintenance. And so why department and position are required is because they correlate to our GL posting accounts. So you can see we have our last name information, our social security numbers, we have hire dates and adjusted hire dates. We also have the secondary status field, which was new to GP2010. So what we heard from customers is we would like to see another tracking field in the system that's easy to change, similar to the extra fields we covered in the HR setup. So we added what's called a secondary status. And if I drill back, you can see that the secondary status is user changeable. So you can create whatever status you want and name it that. We have statuses for inactive and active employees. So if you want to label your employees as remote or however you want to use this field, you can. This is also defaults for your SUTA and workers' comp. So it's only a default that'll roll down to your payroll pay codes. We have employment type, which is full-time, part-time, so you can label that as you want. The classes we talked about before of how we want our things rolled down to our employees, so you can assign them the classes you set up. We have address ID, so you can have multiple addresses in the system. So if your employees go south over the winter, you can have a different address listed here. Or if they retire and move, you can also have a different address to have their W-2s going to. If we look at organizational setup, the overall setup is right down here. So our division is our hire setup, the department, position, the location, and then the supervisor. And your supervisor is tied to an employee. And that is key when you're using a self-service type of module for the direct reports and who your manager is as an employee. If I click on the HR button off the employee maintenance, this is where you can track your I-9 dates that we're going to cover in HR. Also, if I have an HR status, so maybe I'm on maternity leave or family leave, you can mark my HR status and report on it. We also print all the VETS 100 reports, so if you want to track your VETS information, you can do so right in this area. If I click on the extra fields, we looked at that earlier. These were extra fields that I created in HR, and you can fill in that information at the employee and also report off of it. If I click on contacts, this is where you can just put contact information for your employee. If I click on additional information, this is more payroll related as well. It's where you set up your minimum net pay if that is needed for an employee, nickname, alternate name, the gender, ethnic origin, marital status of the employee. Any type of information that's pertinent to your employee can be filled in here. You can see that the work hours per year is the only required field in this window, and that is required for us to process payroll. So we do make sure that you have 2080 or whatever your work hours per year for your employee is. Here's these extra 2 fields I showed you in the payroll setup, how they display right here. So the extra fields are in the employee additional information from the payroll setup window. I'll go ahead and close out of the main employee maintenance window, and we'll go ahead and start looking at some of the information that we need to set up for payroll. So if I click on the tax button, And this is where you're going to put in your federal filing status. So all these filing statuses come from the tax update setup that we talked about earlier in Module 1. So you can see I can have an exempt status for my federal, otherwise married or single. We also support the non-resident alien taxes for the federal as well if you have some of those employees. They have a higher federal tax than your U.S. employees. The EIC is currently not being used, but we do leave it in the system, but it doesn't have any tax tables behind it. So if ever it comes back into existence, we can easily put that information in. The W-2 checkbox, these are fields related directly to your W-2, and you can mark them so they will be marked on your W-2 information. This is my exemptions for federal. What's nice about additional and estimated withholding, they will be at the federal and the state window. So if I want to say take an additional $100 out on federal to keep up for the next year, I can do that. So you can change that at any time your employee elects it on their W-4, your additional withholding will be marked. The estimated field is used for if I want to say just take out $500 for this payroll, or if I want to average it out if I have some agreement assigned. The estimated withholding field will overwrite your tax tables and just use that amount that you have listed in your tax withholding. Sometimes we see that with the NFL players that we have and the baseball teams where they have negotiated an agreement. They would put in an estimated withholding. So it overwrites your tax tables. The transaction entry defaults are for your build when you key transactions for payroll. What state do we want defaulted in? So that would be for your state and local taxes. The Qualified for Employee Hire Act, which is no longer used, but we still have the field there as customers use it for tracking. If I click on the state button, this is where you would assign your state taxes to your employee. So whatever state they could withhold in, you would want to assign those state taxes to your employee. Again, we have the filing status, number of dependents, allowances, additional and estimated, very similar, and your exemptions. If you click on the summary button, this is where as you process payroll, you're going to see your withholding and your taxable wage per year. The payroll system keeps multiple years of data. So it's very nice that when we close the year, we don't have to zero out any of that information. We'll have multiple years of data listed for you. So then the year-end closing is not as critical as it had been in the past. So you would see multiple years listed in your drop-down. If I close out of the state and the federal window, we'll go ahead and continue on. Local tax is very similar to your state, but we have local taxes that you can assign to your employees. The automatically calculate means your state or your local tax will automatically calculate. If I don't have this flagged, then it's based on what my transaction is or what local taxes apply to your transaction. Again, it has the summary button as it does for state as well, so you can see all your summary detail. Quick assignment is another way to quickly assign things to your employees. So if you just want to go into this window and assign these different pay codes to your employees, you can do so with a click of a button. So it's kind of nice for maybe the pay code information. I can also say only see what's assigned to your employees. So if you quickly want to see at a glance what pay codes, benefits, or deductions are assigned to your employee or not, you can use this quick assignment window. Pay codes. So in Module 1, we talked a lot about the setup of your pay codes. This is where you assign your pay codes. And you can assign them by class or the quick assignment window that we just looked at. If I arrow over, you can see I have pay codes assigned to my employee. Ackerman is a salary employee, so I'm going to run payroll with them as a salary type, salary. He's getting paid $52,000 a year. And again, this pay period is very important as we annualize out our taxes. All this defaulted in from the setup that we covered in Module 1, but I can make specific changes to this employee, and it would look at the employee record. Here's my flat taxes down here. If I click on the summary, this is my summary of wages and hours and units. And if I click on the history button, this is where you can see all your history of what's been paid for your employee. And this is very nice when we get into this window. If you're running your FUTA-SUTA reports and you maybe notice that this FUTA was not flagged for a particular payroll, you can go in here and edit those fields. And that was new to GP2013. I'd say it's used mostly around SUTA. If you're a company that's working in multiple SUTA states and maybe flipping between North Dakota and Minnesota and you didn't know till after the payroll was processed, so you can go into this window and flip your SUTA states very easily, where before this was not an editable field until GP2013. So you can change your workers' comp, SUTA, and FUTA fields. So we'll want to make sure all our pay codes are assigned to our employees that we want to pay them on. Vacation, sick, salary, any type. I also want to make note of this primary pay code. So if you ever want to print a report of your employees and their pay rates, mark the primary pay code for their primary pay code, so then only that one will print on those reports. So that's what the primary pay code is used for. If we look at deductions and benefits, we covered them in the setup. If I just pull up my employee, this is the payroll side of these windows. So here's your 401k, your TSA from, percent of gross, maximums based on. We covered a lot of that in the setup information. I have my W-2 boxes, which rolled down. And then if I click on the summary, this is what's been withheld for this calendar year for that deduction. If I click on the sequence button, this is important as we get into deductions, is we do have sequencing. So you can determine what order of your deductions come out of. We can have a company-wide order. So if you want this deduction to come before if you want your insurance to come out at the top before the 401k, you can do that. But then when we get into garnishments, we can choose to have the garnishments come out before any other type of deduction. So I have a company-wide sequence, or I can just say specifically for this employee. So on this employee, I can say take out the employee purchase deduction at the top and let it run that way. So you can sequence your deductions. Typically in the system, if nothing is sequenced or set, we're going to take out your tax shelter deductions first and then your non-tax shelter deductions if nothing is set. But this is really nice for the garnishments if you have a lot of employees in their garnishments. I'll also just show you, I do have a child support garnishment here I set up. If you're ever needing information on garnishment setup, I linked to it in the slide deck, but I have a blog on garnishments because garnishment type setups can get pretty difficult. And so I do have a nice blog that goes through the setup of some of the garnishments. But anytime when the deduction type is a garnishment, different rules apply with your deduction, and you can have maximums for the garnishment and your earnings set up as well. So whenever your deduction type is garnishment, just know that there's different items in the background going on. I'll also go back. Here's your 401k at a standard deduction. So then you know it's not a garnishment type. If we click on the benefits and I pull up my employee, then here's your benefit information that you would assign, your start dates. So even though we have it rolling down from the setup, we can change it at the employee subject to taxes. Your benefits can also be a percent of a deduction. So when you think of your 401k, I'm going to take, my benefit is 5% of my employee deduction, up to an employer max match of 10. So that's a common setup. If we click on the summary button, this is really useful as we start to run payroll. It's going to gather all the summary information for your gross, your federal, FICA, a lot of things that are included on your 941 report and your W-2s. So if ever you're running some reports and you need to gather that information, this summary window is a nice view of your gross, your federal, and FICA, basically what's on your 941 and your W-2. You can sort by month. You can also go down into this September and then into December and see quarter end and year end information. A lot of customers like to drill right back. If you can see, I'm in 2017 on September. My last check, I can drill right back to that information, and it's pulling you into your payroll check inquiry window. We did some nice sorting on this with Service Pack 2 and GP2013 to sort your most recent payrolls to the top. It used to not sort as well, and we added sort by in here. Another item I want to point out in this window is your recreate pay stubs. So on 2010, we added a feature called recreate pay stubs that a lot of customers like and use. And if I just click on this box and click recreate pay stub, this is going to recreate the pay stub, basically a duplicate check, right to your screen. I also like to use this, or tell customers to use this, if you're getting questions from your employees and you're on the phone. This is a nice window to bring up and recreate the pay stub in front of you so you can get a view of what the employee is questioning you about and then go dig into their record for any of the changes or what might have happened. But it gives you a nice view of the check that the employee actually got. So a duplicate pay stub could be if I lost my pay stubs and I need to apply for a loan, I need my last 5 pay stubs. It does say duplicate at the top, and it's kind of a replica of the pay stub you have, but it is a separate form in the system. So a lot of customers like that recreate pay stub option right off the payroll check inquiry window. If I go into the post-dated pay rates window, what this is used for is if you know your employees are getting pay raises as of January 1st, let's say 2015, but I have some time now in December that I'd like to get going on that, you can go into this window, post-dated windows, and start entering it. So my current hourly rate is $5. If I know I'm going to get a raise to $6.50, I can go ahead and key that in and put in the effective date, and you can pull that in. Then it will warn you when you run payroll, and it'll tell you that you have post-dated pay rates. Do you want to activate them? So it's a way to get your increases in the system that when you have some downtime, and then you can activate them when you want. So then it could save you some time. Direct deposit. So in Module 1, we looked at the setup of the direct deposit to get all that information set up. Now, the easy part is to put your employee's account information. So I have my bank number, my account number. Is it a checking account or savings account? And I want 100% of it going into that account. Typically, what we recommend is if I have money going into checking or savings, we would want the amount fields first. So if I'm putting $20 into a savings account, I would want that line first, and then maybe $30 into another checking account, and then this remainder of net in the 100%. So it takes out the different account fields in the amounts, and then the remainder is going into this checking account. The status is if you want them pre-noting. So pre-note means that I'm going to send these numbers to the bank. We want to make sure they're correct, maybe if it's a new employee. And then we move them to active once the bank has confirmed that that account number is correct. So you may want to pre-note them first and then move them to active, and then the amounts will go into those accounts. And that's a per line. You can click on Add Account and add a new account line in here. I think we can have up to 11 different accounts going in for our employees. If we go into looking at our deductions again, one of the things I want to point out is the allow arrears that we had some of the setup there. So if I go ahead, so if on our deductions, if we want to allow arrears, which means we have employees that do not make enough money, we need to put them in arrears to take more the next time, then you're going to want to mark allow arrears. And mandatory arrears is used if I have an employee that is not paid every payroll, but we need to keep track of that insurance that it is taken out. So then you'd want to mark it as mandatory, and we can run a process to look at all 300 of your employees and determine who hasn't been paid this payroll and kick those deductions into mandatory arrears so we know to take double that the next time. So we covered a lot about the payroll of the employee and what we need to do to set up our employees for payroll. Next, we're going to cover, there's a lot of information on the human resource side that you can use for tracking of your employees. So what we'll cover is some of the information on HR. Not all of it is required as it is for payroll, but we will get into everything that we can track on human resources. So again, I expanded out my payroll. I'm now going to go and look at some of the HR items that we can track. So earlier we talked about attendance, and that's our vacation and sick tracking. So I'm going to use attendance for tracking, and what I need to do is set up my time codes on my employee. So if I click on Ackerman and I arrow over, I have some set up. So here's my vacation time code, which is linked to my vacation pay code. We created that accrual schedule so it knows to bump me up in seniority as the years of service I have worked. I have my next accrual date, and here's my hours available that actually print on my check, or that I would see on a self-service type web part. So you would want to make sure that your hours available are correct, because that's what the employee would see. We can also choose to print our available time on checks. So if we have some time codes, maybe we're tracking bereavement time that we don't want to print on checks, or float time, or maybe tardiness, then this is the box you would mark to not print on the check, but you can track that time. So you assign them as many time codes as you want. You can have multiple time codes printing on the check. If I click on the summary, this is where you're going to see as I accrue time. I'll pull up Ackerman. As I accrue time, I'm going to have my hours available over here. If I click on my yearly accruals, I haven't accrued any yet this year, but this is where your yearly accrual, which is tied to your maximum, would show. So if you have an employee that starts to not accrue time and you wonder why, you're going to want to click on the yearly accruals button, and then you will see in here, maybe I've met my max for my yearly accrual, or maybe I'm over the max on my hours available as well. Those are the two key indicators of stopping for your maximums. If I click on the benefits, so we covered the benefits on the payroll side, but we have a correlation right into HR. So similar to, we set up that family coverage earlier in Module 1, I'll go ahead and just assign family to this employee. So it's an active benefit status. You can see at the employee level we have benefit statuses, which are very important when we get into benefit tracking, especially with the healthcare changes we're facing today. So if you need to track that you offered the benefit but they waived it, you may want to put that in here as well. And also it was ineligible or COBRA. I would use these statuses if you can, and then you can report on them. When we talk about setting up of our plans, as long as you want to report on them or know which employee is in each plan, the more detailed of the plan you can get is probably better. So just think about if you want to report on how many are in each plan, then you probably want to make a specific benefit name for that plan. So then, such as family, single, single plus one, so then we can report which employees are in each plan. We have the eligibility date, the benefit begins date, some of the information, our group number, policy number, which you can see aren't required, and your copay information. And it's telling me my required fields aren't entered, so I'll go ahead and put in a benefit begin date there and save. Here it's prompting you to post items to the eligibility or to the to-do list, and I'm going to say yes with that. It's prompting me to go into payroll as well, and we'll go ahead and say yes. So we have the 4 different types we talked about in our setup. We have health insurance, life insurance, retirement plan. We also have FMLA tracking. So you can track your information in FMLA. I'm just going to put my measured in there. So we do have FMLA tracking for our employees as well if you want to track that. Some of the FMLA tracking we have does not work specifically for all companies, and if you look at the FMLA tracking and it doesn't really work for you, what I would recommend is to maybe set up a time code called FMLA. We've done that at other organizations, and you can track in that manner as well. So don't necessarily say you have to use the FMLA window. You could also create a time code called FMLA and track the hours in that way. If I click on the COBRA button, this is if you have an employee that goes on COBRA, you can insert them over, receive the notifications, and if you want, you can track your COBRA premiums and all that through the COBRA window. The benefit and deduction summary is a nice window customers like to use to show them just a summary of your benefits and deductions. Again, I have all benefits, but I can click on enrolled and see the ones that I'm enrolled in as well. So you can see I have all these benefits or the enrolled benefits. It's just a nice view of your benefit information. All right, let's go ahead and drill in on employees for HR. As you can see, we have a lot of information we can track in human resources around employee. So if I go ahead, I'll click on the dependents. This is key if we're doing benefit tracking in the system as well, as you could assign your dependents right to a specific benefit. So you'll want to make sure all your dependent information is updated in the system. So if you do open enrollment through a portal type solution, that you could attach your dependents right to your benefit information. Discipline. So if you want to start to track disciplinary action in the system, you could do so on the discipline window. What's nice about this is it's all stored in the system. Sometimes when I go on site with customers, I ask them, where are you keeping track of this? And it could be an Excel spreadsheet or a file folder. What's nice is if we start to use the HR area and track it, it's all backed up and it's in one place that every user can access if they have rights to it. So it's very important that if you want to track your offense numbers for your employees, you can do so in this discipline window. You can say I gave them a verbal warning. These are all user definable. This is just some sample data. You can also have the point system. So I've seen some customers where maybe they give everybody 100 points. Once we're down to 0 points, that's grounds for termination. But you can use that how you wish. If I click on the earnings history, a lot of customers like the earnings history window. It's similar to position history. I'll use my lookup here. Is that every time I make a change to my pay code and my pay rate, you will see prompts where it was prompting me who did it, the reason I changed it, and the date. And that is all tracking in this earnings history window, which is really nice. So you could do a print screen print from within here, the users that changed it, the date, and it gives you a nice life cycle of their changes of history over the years. The education information defaults in from your applicant record, but it would just be basically your education that you've entered in for your employee. We've covered the main employee maintenance window. I'll go ahead and hit grievances. So you can also track grievances in the system. I have one entered. Any type of grievance that's, that the employee submits, you can track that right within the grievance window. I'd say this window is probably least used, but it is a window for tracking of grievance information if that's something you want to track on. The I-9 window, this is used quite a bit by customers, and it would track all your I-9 information and the eligibility. So am I a citizen? These changed this year in 2014, and so we did release an update that adds those extra fields for you. But a lot of customers track their I-9 information and the expiry dates, so then they're watchful of making sure that those are kept up to date. Injury and illness, the system prints all the OSHA reports. So if you want to track OSHA recordable items, if I have one entered here, anything in the looking glass that's a start item, those are OSHA recordable items, so the M1 through M6. But you may also want to track just other items in general of an injury or illness in your system. What I like about this window is you can see it's a lot of information tracked of the injury, and also you can click on the costs and how much did that cost you as an organization for that injury that happened. You can click on treatment and, was the employee hospitalized? Did you go to the emergency room? And if I click on additional, we have a lot of note fields, which is really nice. Everything is kind of in one area stored by that one incident. And so if ever you need anything for court, if you've attached all these documents right in the notes section, then you can go back and it's all tied together, backed up in a SQL database. And so you're not searching through files or where did we discard that or did we move it off site. It was all stored in the system. So that's what I really like, all tied right up into this case number note here. Orientation, we talked about that in the setup, about how we create orientation checklists. And this is where you assign your orientation and you have your start date and end date, and that would be of your orientation. Position history, this is very similar to the earnings history about how we have pay rate changes, but here we're tracking your position, department changes, and your date. So you'll get a nice life cycle of all your changing of your departments and positions on your employees. Property, and this window is pretty simplistic, but we have a nice property window. A lot of times the IT department has a property tracking system, but if you want to use this for property tracking, you can. What's nice is if I'm terminated as an employee, it does warn you that I have property checked out as well while you're terminating your employee. The reviews, and so we set up some reviews in Module 1, and now you can see I've assigned a review to my employee. The review categories you typed in, you can score them on a numbering system, which I've done here, or a word scale system, good, fair. And then you can also attach a note. So a lot of times customers will say, you know, can we attach reviews that we've completed or any notes from the managers? And you can do that right here in the notes section of the review and attach any documents you'd like to do right within the review. So a lot of customers use this notes icon and attach items. If we look at the skills that we talked about in the setup, you can see that I have that skill set of the SQL knowledge, and I have attained all those skills. We have expiry dates with skills. And here's where we can do that skill query, where we talked about if we needed to send someone on site or find out which employee or applicant has a specific skill I've set up, use the skills query, and it'll go through all your employees very quickly. So skills are nice to assign things to your employees if you need to find out who has some specific skill. Termination window, very similar to the orientation window, but we create a termination checklist, and then what do we need to do in that, and our last day worked, the benefit expires, and our term date. We also have an exit interview if you want to go through that process as well. And the test window, pretty simplistic, but it does track all your testing that you might want. If you're needing of more license and certification, I would recommend looking at the advanced HR area for more pieces of certification and licensing type. But the test and the skills has nice expiry dates and scores that meet most needs. Now we covered the employee for payroll and the employee for HR, and went through a lot of windows of tracking that we have for our employee information. Next, I'd like to talk about position control. And position control was new to HR, and we added it right into the HR module. And we added it back on Microsoft Dynamics GP2010, but there was a charge for this module. Now with Microsoft Dynamics GP2013, how we are including direct deposit, HR, payroll, all in the core area, you now get position control as well. So I want to cover some of the features of position control. It is used a lot around schools or public sectors to manage their positions. So think of it as budgeting, and I have a specific number of positions in my organizational structure, and I need to manage those year by year. And we can have constraints that are applied to those positions so that if I'm not in what they call a seat, I will not get paid as an employee. So what I'll do is go ahead and show you some of those fields for tracking around position control. So I'm going to go up into my home page, go back on HR, but I have position control kind of highlighted up here in the sample company. So I'm going to drill off this area because it's specific to position control. So we can do warnings. I have them set up as warnings right now, but you can even make it where it's not allowed or password protected. So in my position window, I'll show you where you can say how many seats you have. So think of it as I have one position. Instead of entering 5 position names, I have one position, but I'll put 5 seats in that position. And if we go over, we can warn, password protect, or not even allow. We want probably saving to history, and I enabled it in this sample company for demo purposes. So if I go up into position control and position plans, so you would create a current position plan for the current year. So if I say, we'll say 01/01/2014 to 12/31/2014. And what we can do is copy our 2014 plan as the year goes by, and then create a 2015 plan, which is a copy of the 2014 plan. And then in the 2015 plan, start making changes to that. So if I know, if it's an example of a school, let's say, if I know I'm going to get 3 more paras next year in 2015, I can go to that para position, up my seats from 5 to 3, or 5 to add 3 more to 8. So then I have 8 para positions in the 2015 plan. So it's really nice for tracking year by year what we're going to budget for. So if I go into my position, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull one of our positions up that we have, you can see some added fields. So the plan code is the current plan code. That's part of position control. It's tied to the department. And if we use this go-to, that has a lot of things entered for your position control. So what's nice, when we think of position control, think of position as being your core setup for your product. So everything is going to be driven off your position, which some customers like. So you can assign your pay codes based off your position, your benefits. We can roll things down based off our position. So if we click on employee defaults, I can have all this information defaulted to my employee based on my position. So when we talked about class roll downs earlier today, now think of this, it's called inheritance, but we can have a very large roll down based off our position. So sometimes things could get rolled down that maybe we don't expect. If I click on the budget wage, this is where you're going to want to put your permanent seats. So when I was talking about I have 5 positions, permanent seats and temporary, it calculates your FTE, my expenses, and so there's my budget, and here is my actual. Sometimes when customers get into this position information, they may not use all parts of it, but another place they like is the seats. So in this window is where you assign your employees the position. So you assign them by start and end date. So I may be in this position, ADA, Administrative Assistant, from January 1st to March 31st. But then after that, I may be in another position. So your position is really driven based off this date. If I'm not in a position with a date and you're processing payroll, I could be dropped off the payroll as well. So if I click into this blue arrow here, I can then go ahead and add an employee into this position with a start and end date. And you can have an assigned position if I want to put them on hold or available or temporary if I leave that position. So this is basically how you can use position control with your seats. And then you can see as I keyed in that information, this yellow comes up, that's your inheritance. And so it wants to roll down all this thing of the position onto my employee with inheritance. And that's what the yellow yield sign means. Some customers may use this just as a secondary position as well. If they want to track secondary positions that their employees do within the system, maybe I'm a teacher, but I'm a secondary coach, or I'm teaching baseball in the summer, that's a secondary position, and they may use this just for tracking of secondary positions. So use it as you want. Some, like the seat window and the tracking capability it gives you with position control. Let's talk about payroll extensions. So there's 3 core areas to payroll extensions that every customer gets, and they're key to payroll. So we have deduction and arrears, payroll integration to payables, and overtime rate manager. The core payroll has overtime, but if you have very rigid overtime rules, then you're probably going to want to use overtime rate manager in the payroll system. Also, payroll integration to payables gives you a direct link from your deductions or benefits into a payables vendor. So I'll show you some features of that. And then we've talked a little bit about deduction and arrears, and that's used if your employees are not making enough money that you want to keep track of their deductions in arrears. So let's go ahead and look at, I'm going to just key over into our setup. I won't cover a lot of Overtime Rate Manager, but know that it's in there if you want to set up Overtime Rate Manager. And I'll just show you, I just have one set up, but what's nice is you can choose your pay codes in the Overtime Rate Manager, choose your pay codes, and then which ones do you want included for your average overtime rate. So if it's not on that commission or bonus, don't include that in here. And you can choose dollars or hours that are going to calculate into your blended overtime rate. So you can see I have a factor of $1 here because when I go into my pay code, I might have the 0.5 in my pay factor as well. But we have a really good manual and examples that are on Overtime Rate Manager that you, if you want to set that up, I would go review that, which I have links in my slide deck. The next option is payroll integration to payables. I'd say used by most customers. Because if you see yourself going in after cutting payroll and giving the deduction register to another user in payables to go key in all that information, you should be using payroll integration to payables because it automatically moves it over there for you. So if I choose company deduction, I'll choose this INS1. So you can see I have the company deduction into INS1 is going right over to this vendor. So you can, for example, track all your Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance benefits, attach it to a vendor, and when you post payroll, all those amounts are going right over to the vendor. And then what customers do is they may take their bill from that insurance company and cross-check it with what is posted over there in payroll to make sure they're gathering all their money from their employees. So this posts everything right into a vendor. What's nice is you can also choose the federal tax option and attach that to a vendor. So all your federal tax information, your FICA federal, will post over into that vendor. You can do employee specific. So if I have some garnishments for that employee, you can see the employee ID opened up, then I can post that specific garnishment over into a court that I want that information to go to. You can also put descriptions, and this is the description that's going to print on your vendor check. So you can put a description of employee ID, deduction code, and I also want to point out right up here we have description variables. That was new to GP2013. So what we heard from customers is, like maybe on the garnishment, the court is saying, I want the last 4 digits of their social security number. So you can paste that right into the description, and that will print on the vendor check. So we're giving you more options of what to print on that vendor check. Let's look at, I pointed out a little bit, but I just want to recap on your deduction. If your deduction is supposed to allow arrears, that's deduction in arrears, you'll want to mark this. And then mandatory is mainly on your insurance. Anything that's mandatory, that if I didn't get paid this payroll, mark it as mandatory, as I will run a mandatory process when I process payroll. Then when we get into processing payroll with deduction and arrears, when we include these deductions, it will take out the current check's deduction, and if I have arrears, it will put that into arrears and take that as well if it can. So this check deduction window, if I include that deduction to be taken, if I say all, and let's say I had arrears on insurance, it would take my arrears as well if it can. If I go over here under employees, there is an arrears transaction window. And so if I'm an employee, I don't have any entered right now, but if I'm an employee that typically has arrears, it would put your check date that it created the arrears and how much we owe. Over the years, we've had customers that allow loans as well. So if you're a customer that allows loaning, like maybe you allow a $1,000 loan on your checks, we used to tell you to set up a deduction, put in a cap of $1,000, and start to pay them back. And what I've done recently with some customers that work well is instead of creating a deduction, you still have your deduction, but putting it in arrears of $1,000 and then capping it at whatever, 20 or 50 to pay them back. So the arrears gives you a nice original amount, collected amount, and how much is left. So whenever we give loans, I'd recommend to use the rear window that I have as keeping track of that loan amount. It's also nice if you're a customer that allows multiple loans, then you're not creating another deduction for it. You can just put another arrears line item in there for that loan amount. So I'll go ahead in this arrears window and I can pull in, let's see, did I set that up for this 401k? Let me see if I did for this INS2. So I'm just manually keying in one right now, but normally your payroll process will put them in arrears. But you can manually key one in. So I have $50. As I process payroll, it's going to try to take this out, and then it will make adjustments to this window. So this is a nice window to view around all your arrears information for your employees. The last part of our Module 2 is around applicant tracking. So I want to cover the applicant information we have in HR around applicant tracking. We have an entire piece of applicant tracking. Which is nice about the applicant tracking is as you key in this applicant information and you hire the employee, it will automatically flow over to your employee record, which would give you less data entry if you have it entered in your applicant window. Another thing I have pointed on my slide is this email address, and that was new to GP2013, and that's why I'm highlighting it, is that you can enter all your email information into the applicant window. And there is a module called eConnect, and that is what's used to integrate your data, such as Integration Manager or a table import. And with eConnect, because a lot of customers would not key in all your applicant information. If I have 100 applicants, I'm not going to key them all into the system. So what we've created is called eConnect nodes, which would allow you to import all your applicants from a file into Microsoft Dynamics GP, so you're not keying in all that data. So let's go ahead and review some of the windows in your applicant information so you know that it's there if you want to start to use it. You're not required to use any of the applicants, but it's an entire module. So if I click on applicants to expand it out, so here's my applicant. I think I have an applicant entered in here. Here's your applicant information. You can see that your last name, first name are required and your apply date, because once I've applied, I could apply again. So we could have multiple apply dates. So think of this kind of cut down the middle, left and right side. I'm an applicant over here on the left, and here's all my different apply dates for different positions within the company. We have our address information, ethnic origin, age, veteran status, and again we have extra fields like we had on the employee level. So once my applicant's there, I will always be there and I could just update what job I'm applying for. Again, as I stated, what's nice about this is in the applicant tracking, if I hire Rust Hansen, which I will do later, then it's all going to come over as an employee and it'd be less data entry for me. If we click on the cost, this is kind of stating how much is it going to cost me to hire this applicant. So maybe I flew in Rust, he flew in to do the interview with me, paid for some lodging and moving. You could key in all these expenses. If I had 5 applicants on this position, when it's all said and done, because it's all tied by the requisition, we can see a total cost of how much it costs us to hire that position. Education, it's all the education on your applicant. This window would flow over to the education of the employee when you're done. I'll skip the hire right now. The interviews, you can create interview type questions. So instead of coming in with a notepad and paper, you could have your interviews right here within the Dynamics GP and just pull up your laptop and enter your interview questions and your notes. And then other people that are interviewing Rust can also look at your notes if you've already interviewed them. If we click on the offer, so if Rust is a pretty good applicant, we can choose him and make an offer letter. So I could put in a start date. And we're going to keep track of every offer. So you can see here it says offer 1, and then my company and the position I'm offering him. And you can even go down here. I can put in my salary that I'm going to give him. And then insert in what kind of codes am I offering him. Does he get a 401k? He gets family coverage. You can choose that and it prints a nice offer letter if you would like to send to him. So we keep track of our offers If Russ comes back with a contingency, we can do another offer letter as well and keep track of all that information. This would be your references. If you wanted to make notes on the reference and have that information in the system, you can do so as well. Then we have skills and tests, very similar to the employee, that you can track on your applicant. The last piece is the hire. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Russ Hansen. He was a pretty good applicant, so we're going to go ahead and hire him. You can see here I have my employee ID. I'll just put 01 Rust. If I had auto-assign employee ID, that would default in for me. So I'll go ahead and put that in, my work hours per year, and then what is my hire date? We'll say 05/01/2014. And if I click on Save, you'll see, would you like to finish entering this information? If I click Yes, it brings you right into your employee maintenance. Everything is defaulted in for me that I had on the applicant, and then I can go ahead and enter more information. So it saves a lot of time when you're coming from the applicant, and we would want to use eConnect to get some of that applicant information into the system. So what we covered today in Module 2 is looking at the employee setup for payroll. We looked at the HR setup for your employee. We covered position control. We talked about applicant tracking. And we also looked at the extra fields that we had entered in the setup and how we could use them in our business on the employee and applicant areas.